At the Davos JK Cafe, that will be one Greenland taco to go. Yes, we will explain. The Supreme Court sounds skeptical about Trump efforts to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Some heavyweight spectators watched. We will let you know who. Davos attracts industrialists and political leaders and climbers in both worlds. Our Ed O'Keefe talks with one of them, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. Sometime after the dawn of text messaging, way back when, the kids came up with a shorthand for just kidding, JK. Much more recently, and by that I mean the spring of last year, financiers came up with a shorthand for President Trump when he comes face-to-face with a market-rattling tariff confrontation of his own making. That shorthand, TACO, stands for Trump Always Chickens Out. Well, today, JK and TACO merged in Davos. After days of vague and not-so-vague military threats to overtake Greenland, President Trump told a captive and quite anxious audience at the World Economic Forum, JK.
I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland, where we already had it, as a trustee, but respectfully returned it back to Denmark not long ago after we defeated the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, and others in World War II. We gave it back to them. We were a powerful force then, but we are a much more powerful force now.
Hours later, Trump did the taco thing on threatened tariffs of 10% and later 25% on the United Kingdom and 7 European countries that sent a small number of troops to Greenland as a sign of resistance to a U.S.-led military takeover. Those threats of tariffs appalled European allies in ways other Trumpian jousting simply had not. To many Europe watchers, this felt like a cleaving in the alliance. Now, there is something approximating calm. There is a framework with NATO. Details on that framework and the future of Greenland, by the way, bring with them all the visibility of a howling blizzard. No one knows what has been agreed to, but Trump said what is being negotiated will improve security forever.
Well, we have a concept of a deal. I think it's going to be a very good deal for the United States, also for them. And we're going to work together on something having to do with the Arctic as a whole, but also Greenland. And it has to do with the security, great security, strong security, and other things.
Amid this jarring back and forth, a now familiar trading cycle ensued. Yesterday, uncertainty rattled the bond markets and stocks tanked. Today, as the JK and TACO maneuvers materialized, both stabilized. The stock market regained almost all of yesterday's losses. And if you are a nimble short seller, this was a Davos ride to remember. Top Trump administration officials are now tasked with hammering out something with NATO over the future of Greenland. Denmark will have a say, of course, so will Greenlanders. Of course, we should remind ourselves there was always a path for the U.S. to increase security there that did not require threats of a military or economic nature. Amid the JK and TACO theatrics hovering over it all in Davos, the threat of a future unhappy America.
They have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember. A strong and secure America means a strong NATO.
Joining us from Davos, and he has been very hard at work there and is looking quite dapper in his gray jacket, Ed O'Keefe. Ed, catch us up on the day that was.
You keep talking about tacos, Major, and I'm getting hungry. This was a bit of a whirlwind, and I think it's going to go down as one of the more chaotic ones because, look, he arrived this morning here in Europe almost exactly on time, despite having issues with Air Force One overnight on his way here. Lands to a speech that this entire continent, really much of the world, was tracking closely to see how aggressive he was going to get in his pursuit of Greenland. And, eventually gets to it in this long-winded, wide-ranging address that covered his economic policies, his immigration policies, some changes he'd like to make in housing policy to address affordability concerns back home. and then essentially says to the crowd, oh, you want me to talk about Greenland, don't you? Well, look, I'd like to acquire it. It won't involve military force. And he leaves them hanging with, well, what exactly are you looking to negotiate? You know, for what length of time? And then a few hours later does what he often does, makes news on his own social media platform by saying, after meeting with the NATO Secretary General, we have a concept of a plan. We've got concepts of a plan on all sorts of things, health care, other issues that he's been dealing with in the domestic and foreign space, but now this one. And where we essentially are, Major, it sounds like, is that there may just be a discussion about updating that long-standing agreement you mentioned that would allow the United States to expand its military presence at Greenland's invitation whenever and however it needs to. And in essence, they'll talk it out, make some changes, and it will probably lead to a larger U.S. military deployment on a island 3 times the size of Texas, which is 92 miles of paved road and about 57,000 inhabitants, but something and a place that the president says is absolutely essential to America's Western Hemisphere security.
Ed, there are all sorts of interested parties at Davos. One of them you spoke to, North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis. What was his perspective on the Greenland of it all?
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting. There have been a handful of lawmakers in both parties and both chambers here in Europe since Friday, speaking with their counterparts, meeting with other top officials, and Tillis was one of them. Remember, now that he's retiring, not running again for re-election, he becomes one of those senators that's a bit unmoored and can start really telling us what he thinks. And what he thinks is that this has been a big waste of time, that all the president needed to do was use the updated or the existing military agreement and just update it. Figure out with Denmark and NATO what exactly he'd like to send to Greenland. So we talked about that, his concerns. Take a listen. The fact that the president says U.S. military involvement in taking Greenland is off the table, does that ease your concerns?
No, because it was never on the table. I mean, that's a false concession. If anybody thinks that the U.S. Congress would have stood for any sort of troops moved to Greenland, I believe we'd have veto-proof majorities within 2 weeks.
So you see there a reminder that there are a handful of Republicans quite concerned about this who were threatening to work with Democrats to restrict the president's war powers, essentially. And again, Tillis, one of those Republicans who said this was absolutely unnecessary. The other one who's been here, and we've seen locked in conversation with all sorts of people from around the world, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who, of course, has real Arctic concerns given her state's vast reach. They were the 2 Republicans that really stood out in terms of their concerns. The other one who showed up today, though, Major, was Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, of course, a big supporter of the president's foreign policy, arguing after the speech that he thought the president had convinced him even more than before that Greenland should be part of the United States. Of course, since that speech, the plan has changed, and undoubtedly Graham's on board with that, too.
Indeed. Plans have changed, rhetoric has changed, and it's been a whirlwind day. Ed, I'm very glad to say that we will be with you later on in the program. Get you to talk to Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. We want to hear all about that. Ed, we'll be back to you not too long from now. H.R. McMaster is a friend of this show. I'm glad to have him. He served as one of many national security advisors to President Trump during his first term, and H.R. joins me now. H.R., it's always good to see you. Thank you for your time. Evaluate what happened today in Davos in terms of American interests, European alarm, and where it appears to have landed.
Hey, Major, great to be with you. Okay, what you saw today was like every day for me in the Oval Office, 2017 to 2018. And so I think everybody got educated kind of on President Trump's worldview and kind of the dissonance he has about certain issues, but also the issues he's pretty consistent on. You know, as he was boasting about America's economy and the changes that he's made from a domestic policy perspective, you hear that his priority really is economic growth, deregulation. He highlighted his efforts to invigorate manufacturing and to make supply chains more resilient. You heard about border security achievements there, his demands for burden sharing and defense. So he's consistent on all of that. But I think really what you get with President Trump oftentimes is a good objective, what he wants to achieve. Hey, better security in the Arctic. Sign us up for that, because China and Russia clearly have designs on dominating the Arctic. Also, Greenland is very important for missile defense, this idea of the Golden Dome. Okay, sign us up for that. But the problem is always like how he goes about pursuing that objective And oftentimes, he works against his own objectives in doing so. And so the way, the way to achieve what he wants to achieve is to be a champion for sovereignty, the sovereignty of Denmark, the sovereignty of the Greenlanders, and to come on the side of protecting that sovereignty. But of course, it's an affront to their sovereignty to even suggest that we would take Greenland by force, a territory of a NATO nation, which, by the way, signed up for supporting the United States after 9/11, as all NATO nations agreed to Article 5, the attack on one is attack on all. And Denmark actually took more casualties per capita in Afghanistan, fighting against the enemies of all civilized people, our enemies, jihadist terrorist organizations there in the Taliban, than any other country. So hey, it's always a mixed bag with President Trump. What you got was the boasting, the deep sense of aggrievement. Everybody saw that. But I think what you're going to see oftentimes, as you do with President Trump, is some outlandish statement, and then a walking back of that statement to a more rational approach to accomplish an objective that we all might agree with.
HR, I want to pick up on the thread you mentioned about NATO and the post 9/11 world. Today, in his speech, the president said he had real doubts that NATO would ever be with the United States. We have a proven track record of NATO being with the United States the one and only time Article 5 was invoked after 9/11. That is a complete, and it seems to me, needlessly insulting misreading of actual history.
Absolutely. And so what he's right about, let's just start with that, right? He's right about the fact that many NATO nations, really all of them, were kind of free riding on American security, America's provision of security in the post-Cold War world. And so what you have is he sees Europe as, and the EU in particular, has 19% of the world's GDP, 50% of the world's social spending, but they're not spending on defense, and we're covering their defense bills for many years. And so the aggrievement that he has is, hey, we've been underwriting their social programs, American taxpayers have, when they haven't been assuming responsibility for defense. Okay, that's legitimate. But actually, NATO is strong, and we are stronger with NATO, because imagine what we would have to invest in defense if we didn't have NATO. If you add up the defense budgets for NATO countries minus the US, it dwarfs Russia's defense capabilities and defense budget. And as we already mentioned, and what you're alluding to, Major, I mean, the only time Article 5, an attack on what is attack on all, was invoked was after the mass murder attacks of 9/11. And so, what he said is not accurate. We don't get anything out of NATO. We get a lot out of NATO. Now he should declare victory, because as he did in the speech, he points out, hey, now NATO nations are investing more in defense. It's become a reality. And there are less tangible benefits to the alliance that I think are worth highlighting, Major. I mean, if you look at just the response, again, to the mass murder attacks of 9/11 and the offensive operations that we engaged in Afghanistan, we got there super fast. You might remember, within a couple of weeks, we're operating against the Taliban in a landlocked country in Central Asia. How do you get that? You get that by forward position capable U.S. forces. You get that by overflight rights that are granted to you as a member of the alliance.
Right.
And so I think when you look at the broader competitions as well with China's economic aggression, hey, the free world needs to stand together. So I think, what we're going to do is we're going to back into stronger cooperation in the transatlantic relationship. Ultimately, the alliance will be stronger, but the hardest thing to rebuild, Major, is trust. And I think a lot of this rhetoric has eroded, the trust in the transatlantic relationship.
Valuable perspective as always. H.R. McMaster, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Major.
Supreme Court heard arguments today over whether President Trump exceeded his authority when he fired Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The president has attempted to oust Cook for alleged mortgage fraud. Cook, who sued over her removal, has denied wrongdoing. No other president, we should note, has attempted to fire a Fed governor in the history of the central bank. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins me now. Jan, the gallery there was filled with interested observers. Ben Bernanke, former Fed chair, and current Fed chair Jerome Powell.
Yes, and Lisa Cook, too.
And Lisa Cook, too. Also an interested party, to be sure.
Very interested.
What did the questioning indicate, if anything, to you?
I mean, it was a terrific argument, 2 hours, and I think it was very clear that all the justices, liberal and conservative, very skeptical of the president's broad arguments. I didn't see any takers for
because the court considers the Federal Reserve something different.
Right, and the way the law is written, the way Congress created the Fed, the court has said in previous cases that it's unique. So the president, the way the law is written, can only fire a governor or chairman for cause. So, of course, now we see the president arguing this mortgage application issue gives him cause to fire Lisa Cook. She, of course, as you said, sued. And she said, I never even got a chance to defend myself. There was no formal notice. There was no hearing. There's no real judicial review, as Justice Elena Kagan said in court today. So it just means that the president can just say, I'm firing you for cause, and that's the end of it. So the justices were skeptical of that. Justice Brett Kavanaugh even took it a step further, as he often does. He's always kind of thinking about the long game. And, he makes the point that this is just going to politicize the Fed even more than Congress ever would have intended, because if they make it this easy for a president to say, I'm firing you for cause, then what's to stop a Democratic president from doing the same thing, doubling down, ginning up some for cause reason, and then firing all the Republican appointees to the Fed? Congress created the Fed to be independent, free from political interference. And that's the stakes in this case. And also, Jerome Powell, like you said, very interested observer, because it could affect Trump's efforts to oust him.
And Jan, it's been reported that others, either in the administration or close to people within the administration, have mortgage paperwork that is as curious as Lisa Cook's. I'm not saying it's criminal or even violative, but curious, and nothing happened to them. Did that come up at all?
Well, the way that came up was the justices on several occasions said, basically, this is a paperwork error. I mean, are we going to have somebody, we call that
are we going to jeopadize
gross
the
negligence because you checked the wrong box? And she
over a paperwork issue,
right? And she had an attachment to her application that clarified the wrong check. So she's arguing this is outrageous, and I never even got to defend myself. So, I mean, I think that she is clearly going to win this case. Probably court may send it back for more fact-finding, but Trump's not going to get this sweeping ruling that he wants, which, again, I think that could, if he did get that big ruling allowing him to fire Lisa Cook, that could really set the ball in motion for his efforts to fire Jerome Powell. And we all know that's what he wants to do.
And the court appears resistant to that.
Absolutely.
In part because, and this court has often read carefully, congressional intent, and congressional intent here is very clear.
The language is very clear.
Jan
the
Crawford,
statute.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so very much. Still to come, local officials in Minnesota fire back over DHS assertions that they are releasing or have released dangerous criminals into the street. Now, Vice President Vance is heading to Minneapolis.
The president's speech was dangerous, disrespectful, and unhinged.
Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear on President Trump's World Economic Forum speech. He's just one of many potential 2028 candidates in Davos. And from Switzerland to the campaign trail, President Trump, unhappy with his White House PR team, he said so yesterday, now will hit the road to tout his economic agenda ahead of the midterms. Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Tensions between state officials in Minnesota and the Trump White House are increasing. The Department of Homeland Security is claiming that local authorities are not cooperating. Minnesota Corrections Chief Paul Schnell tells our Nicole Skanga those allegations are false.
Does it feel like the Department of Homeland Security is lying when it says that state authorities are not cooperating?
It is fundamentally false. We cooperate with ICE and ICE detainers. We have, as a matter of policy, done that for a long, long time. And so how they can say that is unbelievable. I just cannot find any way to explain what they're doing.
Nicole Skanga joins us now from St. Paul. Nicole, I'm always happy to have you with us. What else did you learn in your conversation with Mr. Schnell?
Yeah, Major, just to set the scene for you, if you can hear protesters behind me, it's because we're outside of the federal law enforcement ICE facility here in St. Paul. We were inside that building just yesterday. I'll get to Mr. Schnell in just a minute. But inside that building, Major, we were told by top ICE and CBP officials, a pretty explosive, what they said was a fact. I think the jury is out on that. But that state officials have released upwards of 400, 500 criminals into the streets of Minnesota. Now, we asked the top corrections officer in the state of Minnesota, Paul Schnell, about that. Take a listen to what he had to say. The Department of Homeland Security says roughly 450 criminals have been released into Minnesota's streets. And you say you don't know where that number comes from?
We have no idea where that number comes from. We know that we released 84 people.
To ICE.
To ICE, that were subject to detainers. And so this notion that Minnesota is not honoring federal ICE detainers is utterly untrue.
Why is this so far off from the American public's understanding of what's happening?
I can't explain it. It makes no sense.
And Major, when you hear that discussion of federal detainers, immigration detainers, basically an immigration detainer is a request from ICE that asks a federal, state, local law enforcement agency, prisons, jails to notify ICE as early as possible before they release a removable individual or someone who is here in the United States illegally, and to hold that person for up to 48 hours so that ICE can pick them up. Now, yesterday, in that federal facility, we also heard from officials within ICE and CBP that said right now there are more than 1,360 ICE detainers statewide. We went back to Commissioner Schnell. We asked him about that number, and he told us that he did a statewide jail survey and found that 207 individuals in state prisons and 94 in county jails are subject to ICE detainers right now. That is fewer than 300, and that is certainly nowhere near the 1,360 immigration detainers that DHS claims are out right now. So we have reached out to the Department of Homeland Security. But while for weeks we've been covering sort of dueling narratives here on the ground in St. Paul and in Minneapolis, we're now finding that officials can't even agree on the actual numbers here. And you have the state's top corrections officer telling us he's not even sure where DHS is getting its facts.
That is important reporting, Nicole. Thank you so very much for that. I really appreciate it. House Republicans begin their push to hold Bill and Hillary Clinton in contempt over testimony related to the Epstein files. Plus, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is in Davos. Our Ed O'Keefe talks to him about the Trump effect. All that coming up next here on The Takeout. And I welcome you back. Here is a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. House Republicans have advanced a resolution to hold former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in contempt over the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. The House Oversight Committee approved this move after Republicans said the pair refused to testify. The Clintons argue the subpoenas are invalid and that they have found ways to reach an accommodation over testimony. Full House is expected to vote on this matter beginning of February. We should note the Justice Department has still not complied in full with the law requiring the release of all Epstein-related files. Lindsay Halligan's turbulent tenure as interim U.S. Attorney for the U.S. Eastern District of Virginia has come to an end. Attorney General Pam Bondi confirmed Halligan's exit in a social media post, calling it a, quote, significant loss for the department. Halligan's departure came after a Trump-appointed judge ordered her to stop, quote, masquerading, unquote, as a U.S. attorney after a November ruling invalidated her appointment. As a result, cases Halligan brought against former FBI Director James Comey and New York City Attorney General Letitia James were dismissed. Several potential 2028 presidential candidates have made appearances at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. One of them, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who called President Trump's speech today unhinged. Our Ed O'Keefe, as promised, joins me again from Davos. He spoke with Governor Beshear. Ed, take it away.
Major, so you mentioned a handful of 2028 wannabes or possiblies, let's say, are here. California Governor Gavin Newsom, who's made his presence known every day, he's been in attendance. The Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer still talks about possibly running. She was here as well. And the Kentucky Governor Beshear. The three of them And Oklahoma's Republican Governor Kevin Stitt invited guests to talk about being governors in the United States. A good opportunity for state executives who don't necessarily dabble in foreign affairs to come to this side of the world, meet with business leaders, and maybe meet some counterparts that they would like to deal with in a more professional role later on. Bashir didn't deny that that might be part of what's going on here. But we talked right after he attended the president's speech, and he didn't like what he heard. You've just come from the president's speech. You were in the room. Your impressions of what he had to say?
The president's speech was dangerous, disrespectful, and unhinged. The president spent an hour plus disrespecting our allies, calling them names, even doing fake voices for them in private conversations. He called some of our allies dumb to their face and specifically called out leaders who have been great friends to the United States of America. We are less safe when people believe that the United States isn't committed to the NATO alliance. We are less safe when we push Canada, one of our strongest partners, away from us and towards China. And then just the rambling and the random stories, calling Greenland, which he believes is so important, Iceland, numerous times. It makes you wonder.
I imagine you've had some conversations with other world leaders that are here.
Not just here. I've gone through Helsinki to Stockholm to here, and the leaders in Europe are hurting. You know, the United States has been the leader of the free world, and now we're acting like the bully on the playground, saying that just because we can do something means we should do something. That's not the United States that they know. That's not the United States they've looked up to, and that's not the United States the world needs. We need to get back to being who we are, and I hope that the people of Europe, that our close allies, know that America is more than just our president.
I was going to say, we did a poll in recent days that found 7 in 10 Americans opposed to the idea of spending any federal dollars to buy Greenland.
Yes.
And roughly the same amount opposed to the idea of using military force to take it. So the country, in essence, is against the president on this one. Yes. I guess as you go home and this issue continues to persist, what's the country to do to try to convince the president otherwise?
Well, first, we've got to speak out, and that's why I'm here. As I go home, I hope our Republican congressmen and women and senators will grow a spine again and will start doing their darn job, that they will stand up to a president who is going far beyond his regular powers, that is stepping in and taking authority from Congress, and they will put a stop to it. I mean, the idea that the congressional leadership, Republican leadership, hadn't said Greenland is an absolute no publicly means that they are not acting as a separate branch of government. They put their hand on a Bible, many of them. They pledged to uphold the Constitution, and they're not doing it.
The White House made a point of saying that the president is set to begin a fair amount of domestic travel starting next week to try to drive home the midterm message and help Republicans. Governor Bashir is currently serving as the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association, the group responsible for getting more Democrats elected to lead states across the country. And he said he looks forward to seeing the president out on the campaign trail back home because he thinks it ultimately will help Democratic candidates as Republicans have to defend the Trump record. He says right now, Democrats are looking good in Georgia, Iowa, and possibly Ohio. Those could be surprise races for Democratic gubernatorial candidates. Major, interesting to see him here. We asked, how does this help a presidential campaign? He said, I'm not there yet. We're worrying about governors first.
You mentioned possiblies there. Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrat of California, also there. He was given a bit of a takedown, or at least an attempted one, by the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, today. Let's take a listen to that.
I think it's very, very ironic that Governor Newsom, who strikes me as Patrick Bateman meets Sparkle Beach Ken, may be the only Californian who knows less about economics than Kamala Harris.
So that reference to Patrick Bateman, you'll have to look up the movie American Psycho. Google it, kids. You'll have fun. Ed O'Keefe, Governor Newsom also had something canceled there today and blamed the White House. What happened?
Yeah, he was supposed to be at an event hosted by Fortune magazine at what's called the USA House or the Freedom House. Many countries, companies have facilities in Davos that they host events at. Apparently, his office is claiming the White House essentially told Fortune you couldn't invite any non-federal or non-administration officials to appear. Who knows? Newsom also is speaking tomorrow, where he is likely to lay out a real case against the president, but he has been a omnipresent figure here over the last several days. Major.
Ed O'Keefe, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you. From the sidelines of the NFL to the political arena, sports reporter Michelle Tafoya launches her Republican Senate bid in Minnesota. More on that and other hot political topics when we bring in the panel next year on The Takeout. Well, welcome back to The Takeout. I thank you for hanging out with us. Former NFL sideline reporter Michelle Tafoya announced her run for the Senate in Minnesota as a Republican. Here's what she told CBS News Minnesota about her qualifications.
I've been a journalist. I ask questions. I look for answers. I look for truth. And I hold people to account. I never went on the air and reported a story unless I knew it was absolutely sound. I think dealing with people is really what it comes down to. And you're dealing with coaches, owners, players, players when they've lost, players when they've won, all those circumstances. And that might not seem relevant, but I would contend it is.
Also relevant, name recognition, and Michelle Tafoya starts the race with plenty of that. I want to bring in our political panel. Doug Heye, Republican strategist, former communications director for the RNC. Kendra Barkov-Lammy, Democratic strategist, former press secretary to Vice President Joe Biden. Doug, Michelle Tafoya, assess.
Well, you start with the obvious, name ID.
Yeah, huge.
And the other, as we saw in that clip, she knows how to talk.
She's a talker.
Now, holding people to account isn't always what did you feel when you scored that game-winning touchdown, which is a lot of the sideline questions. But she can talk. She has a huge name ID. And the most interesting thing to me was she was asked about what's happening in Minneapolis. And she didn't give the standard Trumpian line. She said it was a tragedy. It shouldn't have happened. That tells us potentially.
Renee Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Tells us potentially she could be a different kind of Republican. We'll have to see.
And she would necessarily need to be in Minnesota because Minnesota Republicans tend to be little more shades of moderate than hard Trumpian Southern or border state Republicans.
Absolutely. If we go down the list of longtime Republicans from Minnesota, they don't tend to really be the right wing of the party. One other just cautionary note there. She is a first-time candidate, and you never know, R or D, how somebody is until they've actually started campaigning for that job.
Kendra, any thoughts?
I was just going to say, it is early. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of folks get into the primary. I do think if ICE continues to do what they are doing in the state, it's going to be hard for any Republican to win in the general election.
Because of the general public attitude that whatever law enforcement or public safety objectives you're pursuing, the harshness of these tactics rub us the wrong way.
Of course, you're seeing people pulled out of their homes, American citizens pulled out of their homes with blankets on them. That is going to be something that's going to be used in ads for any Democrat in any state, but let alone in Minnesota.
And one thing to watch here is if she campaigns as a non-traditional, say, in the new Trumpy Republican Party, non-traditional Republican, what does Trump do when she tries to do some separation? Most Republicans, when that happens, he mows them down. The smart thing would be to let her do what she needs to do to win. Donald Trump doesn't always do that.
Let's do an update on redistricting. We talked about it a lot several weeks ago for all sorts of important reasons. Just want to update things. Our friends at the Cook Political Report have we have a couple of graphics on this. Where things stand right now, redistricting that's been signed into law. You've got Texas +5, Missouri +1, North Carolina +1, California +5. In all likelihood. Those are not guaranteed, but that's certainly the trend lines. Now, redistricting that is pending, again, from our friends at the Cook Political Report. Virginia, +4, possibly. Maryland, +1. Florida, +3. So, Doug, when all the dust settles from this, will have this been a net plus or net negative or a push for President Trump?
Complete waste of time for the American public is the honest answer.
I can agree on both of that.
I was told there was going to be no math here, but if I did the pluses and minuses...
I always do it with caution on live television.
I think basically it was a wash. And so ultimately we went through this for nothing. I think we further stratified parties and voters against each other.
I wonder, though, this, Doug. Does redistricting and efforts to do it antagonize the out party more than it mobilizes the in party?
I don't think we know yet. I don't think we know yet. But we also know that there aren't a whole lot of competitive seats regardless. And so we've taken some that were competitive and moved them to non-competitive, Republican and Democrat.
Yeah, I was going to say, Doug and I don't always agree on a lot of things, but I do think that this is what right for the American people. The American people should get to go to the poll. They should get to vote for the person they think is the right person, not based on where they live precisely, but based on their geographic area.
That happens once every 10 years after a census.
Correct.
Mid-session, jarring, and disruptive.
Correct.
All right. I know you're so happy to hear this, folks, but we're looking toward a potential government shutdown again at the end of the month. One of the things that's going to hang in the balance as to whether or not there is or isn't is funding for the Department of Homeland Security. An underlying issue there, what limits, if any, will be placed on ICE personnel? House and Senate Democrats are pushing for some. Republicans are refusing. This could snag everything. Doug?
First off, the House has passed all of its appropriations bills. And really, that should be the front page banner headline, because that hasn't happened in generations at this point.
It is required, though, Doug.
Sure. It's been required and hasn't happened,
it's basic
right?
work, yes.
Yes, Congress doesn't do its basic work.
I'm not going to pat them on the back
most of the time.
They're supposed
I
to
will
do
pat them
anyway.
on the back for this, but we come to a real choke point, and that's the United States Senate. And it seems pretty clear that they're not going to be able to get 60 votes. Going into a shutdown in an election year is very different from where we've typically been. We really use it in the out years. So how this plays electorally, I don't think we know yet.
Kendra, for Democrats, a smart move to block, maybe have another shutdown over this issue?
Look, I think that there is an opportunity here for Democrats to use this, what we are seeing in Minnesota, we are seeing playing out across the country, to do the right message. I do not think defunding ICE as a message as a whole is the right thing for Democrats to do. But I do think there is an opportunity here to highlight exactly what is going on, because it is going to draw people to the voting box come November.
Being specific about the circumstances in which pepper spray might or might not be used. Something like that goes to specifics of what you do on the ground when you encounter people who are protesting, something of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing on the ground law enforcement themselves, not ICE, but local law enforcement pushing back on ICE's tactics. And so I think you're going to see that play out in a way that Democrats should use to their advantage as they're working on these bills.
Kendra, you get the last word. Kendra, Doug, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
You don't need the tie next time, my brother. You do not need the tie. Next, the author of a new book, The Invisible Coup, joins me here on The Takeout to discuss his views on migration. That's next. Welcome back. The Invisible Coup. That is the name of author Peter Schweizer's new book and how he describes immigration in the United States. Schweitzer alleges so-called American elites, that's his terminology, and foreign powers are using immigration as a weapon to in part change the demographics of our country. Earlier, I spoke with him about the book. Take a listen. Let's start with the title, Peter. Why do you use the word coup, and do you mean that figuratively or literally?
I mean it figuratively, but what I mean essentially is that there are political implications, national security implications for mass migration, particularly when you look at the motivations of some of those foreign entities behind it, meaning China, the Mexican government, the Muslim Brotherhood, and others. Their intention is for this mass migration and the activism accompanying it to have serious political repercussions inside the United States.
And the word invisible, I read the book, and if I understand the book correctly, it's not so much that you think it's invisible. You quote people who speak in public forums all over the place. If I understand the book correctly, it's not being seriously addressed, meaning it's sort of being ignored or overlooked. It's not its invisibility, it's the problem, if I read the book correctly. It's that no one's doing anything about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's well said. It's invisible in the sense that the political networks and the strategy behind this is not apparent to people. We've had a national conversation, I think an important one, on immigration, what the level should be as it relates to economics, as it relates to violent crime. What we've not had is a conversation about the weaponization of immigration and what these foreign entities are doing. That's the part that is invisible.
Let me ask you about parts of the book that spend a great deal of time talking about the number of Mexican consulates in this country, their affiliation and relationships with progressive groups in America, voting implications. And as you know, Pew Research doesn't just take exit poll data from elections, but then they compare it to actual vote tabulations, and their final assessments are some of the best in the business. 2016, Trump got 28% of the Latino vote. 2020, he got 36%. 2024, he got 48% of the Latino vote. 37 million Mexicans live in this country, are part of the Latino population. That's 60%. So that trajectory tells me, or suggests to me at least, Peter, that among Mexican-born Latinos living in America who vote, they went consistently for Trump, which means this attempt to create a political coup didn't really work.
Well, it hasn't worked as they've wanted it to, but it's not for a lack of trying. And my point is, we need to understand Mexico has 53 consulates in the United States. The UK and China have 6 and 7 respectively. Massive number. And as I lay out in the book, and I name the officials, these consular officials who are diplomats are engaged in supporting political activities, trying to affect presidential elections. So they may not have the complete success they hope to, but it's not for a lack of trying. What you're also seeing, by the way, is a generational shift. The studies show really since the 1990s that among new voters, people that have just gotten citizenship, they break 80 to 85% for Democrats, but that changes over time. 20 years later, it gets closer to 50-50. What is key is that 20-year gap where there's a huge advantage. So the political implications are real. It's not perfect, but I think it's inappropriate for the Mexican government and their diplomats to be engaged in this kind of political activity inside the United States.
You talk late in the book about Zoran Mamdani, who, when the book was being written, was the primary winner in the New York mayoral primary. He's now the mayor of New York. And you say he's a kind of embodiment of some of this effort to influence American outcomes. When Zoran Mamdani stood next to President Trump was asked if he was a danger, if he had any unsavory relationships, and President Trump said, no, I think he's a very fine man. Is Trump missing this?
Well, I think a lot of people don't understand the full international nature of what Mamdani represents and the people that were cheering for him. I was surprised about this, too. As I point out in the book, Mamdani's campaign was tracked in Iran. It was tracked by organizations in the Middle East. You had a newspaper tied to Hezbollah, the terrorist organization in Lebanon, cheering on the campaign and saying it'll be great if Mamdani wins because not only is mayor of New York, but as a political future. And they speculated that, he could become the Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, why would a terrorist organization want that? I think we all kind of know. I'm not implying or saying that Mamdani is tied to Hezbollah, but clearly these Muslim activist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, like the Iranian government, like what they see in Mamdani. There are entities in the United States that are, let's say, sympathetic to those causes who gave to Mamdani's campaign. It's something that deserves scrutiny, I think, simply because of the international nature that his campaign symbolizes.
Peter, Ronald Reagan used to have a phrase when he was asked about support from sectors of American politics like the John Birch Society. He would say, just because they support me doesn't mean I support them. In the case of Mamdani, would that fly with you?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, we'll have to see, right? We'll have to see what positions he's taken. I think certainly some of his appointees have raised controversy. But the bottom line is this is a strategy that they speak about openly, the Muslim Brotherhood and mullahs. I quote them extensively in the book. They believe, because most American voters are so apathetic, if they achieve even 10 or 12% of the population in a given locale, they can swing an election to a candidate that is sympathetic for their cause. Mamdani is an example that they cite. Let's see what he does as mayor to see how happy they are with his election.
The book is The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon, by Peter Schweitzer. Peter, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Major.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report, coming up next.